Okay, so we have a Liberal leadership race as Chrystia Freeland is in that race. And as I said, one of the contenders she'll be up against is former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, who announced his bid yesterday in Edmonton.
Yes, Canada needs change, but not just any change. We need change that works for people, and we've never needed it more. So if you remember one thing from what I say today, remember this. I am going to be completely focused on getting our economy back on track.
Okay, it's Friday. There's a lot going on, a lot to talk about with our party insiders. Greg McEachern, you know him. He's a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. So, it's been a busy couple of weeks since we all got back from holiday. Greg, what do you make of where this race is shaping up now? Freeland's getting in the weekend. Karina Gould's getting in the weekend. Mark Carney got in officially yesterday. And then there's that other tier of people looking at it.
Well, Carbon Tax Cochrane, good to join you. With Carbon Tax Delory, Carbon Tax Richer. Hey,
you ran on one, buddy. You can't distance yourself. There's no take back.
We're not going to be able to awards program. We're not going to be able to use it much longer.
Yeah.
So one of the things that our little happy gang here chatted about over when we did our Christmas, our holiday episode and
our look ahead.
Yeah, our look ahead is how much oxygen would a Liberal leadership take out of the political room, and apparently a lot of it. So I'd say right now, when, again, we consume a lot of news, the stories right now in politics seem to be about the Liberal leadership and Team Canada -1 in terms of facing Donald Trump. So I do think it's kind of interesting. There's some polling today that suggests that it has had an impact. I'd like to see a trend of it before it's a one-off or an outlier, so I won't go into too much detail. But, if that's true, that people have responded this way. But I will say this, I have to eat a little bit of crow as somebody who is neutral, but I've been critical of Mr. Carney. The Daily Show appearance was a bit of a game changer. I saw people on Facebook, and again, I'm Generation X. We're still there. Boomers are still there. As gross as the owner might be, a lot of people that I didn't consider political were sharing that and talking about that in a very positive way.
Are they sharing the speech?
They're not sharing the speech, and again, it's a speech during the day. Like if we want to talk about, I know your panel with your earlier panel with journalists talked about it, and I think that I didn't know about the teleprompter issue.
So just for people who are watching, Greg, I'm going to interrupt you. Just bring this in, and I want to get to Fred on this because the speech was kind of halting. He was far more comfortable than Mark Carney was on the Daily Show, and this is what Ashley Burke captured on her phone. That's the screen for a teleprompter. That projects up. It looks like a vacuum cleaner, and then it projects onto a screen that Mark Carney can read. If you look at that black bit on the bottom, that's the text, white text on black background. It was glitching and going crazy, and so you can't read when it's going that fast, right? And so you saw him WhatsApp and then look into his pages. Now, be ready for the speech. Be ready to go with the paper copy. This is why I have all of this in front of me every day.
That's an advance issue, and that's something that should be very easily and quickly taken care of. But I know that Bill Clinton did a State of the Union where a similar thing happened, and he knew it and he delivered it, and the speech caught up about 10 minutes.
But Bill Clinton was a rare political athlete. Fred, what do you make of what we saw this week? Let's just talk about Mark Carney for a second. What do you make of the launch and the way he positioned himself criticizing the economic record of the government he wants to take over?
Well, to start, I thought his launch, his launch on U.S. media was interesting. It was an interesting choice. And I thought he did well. I thought he did. He looked smart. He looked personable. He looked likable. I'd never actually seen him really talk before. And I've got some feedback from people who are not political saying a similar thing, except for they've never heard of him before. They're not in the bubble like we are. They're not people that watch the show.
Does that help him though, or does that hurt him? Like it's a blank slate you can build from, right?
Yes. Here's the problem. Trudeau's left us so late. We have a 2-month thing. We're likely going into a race, a general election. He's got to define himself to 41 million people quickly, and there's a big machine trying to define him called the Conservative Party, which is very, very active in this leadership race.
Can you be defined as carbon tax Carney if you are going to kill the carbon tax?
Well, it sounded...
Because he's still in for industrial pricing, maybe cap and trade, but consumer carbon price.
It sounded like he was trying to repackage it with a new name, like an energy tax or something. If it's long-winded, confusing answer that he gave in that Q&A, where he said it's not selling well, it was... it's not popular, but we have to do something. And basically it sounds like he is going to have some version of a carbon tax.
Industrial emitters, though, and is that not what the Conservatives want as well? Is that not
But
That's
I
unclear.
don't think he's
Yeah.
ruled out consumer.
Yeah.
Well, he did in a speech last year say
Yeah.
it's outlived its usefulness. We need to figure it out. Mel, what are your thoughts as the communications expert at the table? What did you think of the way Carney got into it and this? It's almost like a soft launch with Christopher Freeland. She's going to launch Sunday up against the NFL playoffs, which is an interesting television choice. But what are your thoughts on what we've seen this week?
Right. Well, I think when we first heard that Mark Carney was going to be on Jon Stewart's show, everybody was kind of like, not sure that that's where I would launch if you're trying to talk to Canadians. But same kind of reaction. It was like, oh, everybody's had this idea about him that he's going to be this like suit guy who's ivory tower, who people can't connect with. And then what a lot of folks saw was somebody who could be actually quite charming. Fast forward to his speech, though, and that's not at all the same Mark Carney that we saw. So I think that and how that plays out, I think will be super interesting in the leadership.
But just on that, the Q&A he did after the speech was more like the Daily Show
was better,
appearances.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
there was 3 acts
Yeah.
and movements, right?
The thing, though, is you only get so many opportunities, and often people won't continue to watch the
Right.
questions, right? So if all you're watching is this guy talk to you and, he's not getting interrupted, he's not being asked hard questions, that's typically what you would see is the clip of the speech. Typically that's what you would see on social as well. If that's all you're seeing, I don't know that he's, got a lot of people excited after that speech. But put that aside for a sec.
Yep.
I thought the interview that you just did with Minister Holland was fascinating as it relates to Chrystia Freeland joining the race. You asked some great questions. The question of like, what do you make of what happened? How can you forgive that? And the response was, well, sometimes you've got some dissent and some debate. And if that's what we're characterizing as dissent and debate is that's a new way to characterize what happened on the 16th. I think, that was, to your point, super harmful to the Liberal Party. So to shrug that off was interesting. And also, I think shows why the Prime Minister had no choice but to resign. If you've got Minister Holland, Minister Boutier, important ministers in his cabinet who are so quickly, endorsing her. So maybe there was a lot of folks kind of at the cabinet table upset. And then the third thing that I wanted to point out was the communication question. How do you go out to Canadians when you've had a really hard time talking to them so far? And the response was, well, she was really good talking about NAFTA, but not talking about NAFTA to regular folks.
No.
Doing NAFTA behind the scenes. So how do you use that in an election race when you're trying to, win the hearts and minds of people? I think is really interesting. So qualifying her that way, maybe not the way that her camp was hoping for, but I thought that was a fascinating interview while we're waiting for her to officially announce.
There was certainly dissent. There hasn't been much debate because we haven't heard from Chrystia Freeland since she resigned. It's been over a month. Like no on the record conversation about what went through her mind and why she did it. So Greg, that is left there as a void, and she's going to launch with those questions around what happened from December 13th to December 16th unanswered. Do you get a clean day when you haven't answered those questions?
And her detractors are going to say, well, you're focused on Donald Trump in the United States, but the Prime Minister gave you the opportunity to work on that. So that's going to be noise.
Yeah.
I look back, June 2017, she was Foreign Affairs Minister. She did this remarkable speech in the House about, we had a good idea of how Donald Trump was going to be treating us, treating the world at that point. She did a really phenomenal speech about Canada's need to go it, not necessarily alone, but in a different direction. She actually talked about we can't be reliant on the U.S. security umbrella, which is what Donald Trump tried to say recently, that we are on the coattails. And we've kind of lost that. We've also, there were a lot of shuffles. A lot of ministers didn't get to stay in portfolios for very long, and 3 years later we were in the pandemic. She has some things that she can talk about with that, but we've all talked about this, that there is a communication issue. And I think about when she interviewed Hillary Clinton. Her questions were sometimes
This is at a Liberal convention.
At a Liberal convention, her questions sometimes were as long as Hillary Clinton's answers. And I think, if I'm working for Mark Carney right now, I'm looking and saying, okay, the Daily Show, well, the scrum, well, the speech, not so well. And again, we know there was a little fumble, but again, you have to be ready for those. Play into your authentic self. And I think this is where Karina Gould might be refreshing to a lot of Liberals, because she handles herself in front of scrums extremely well. She comes across as herself, not as a presentation of what you think she's supposed to be.
Yeah, look, the teleprompter can break. It's maybe a reason. It's not an excuse. People don't care, right?
Yeah.
People, it's just, I thought it was fascinating to see it, because, I read off a teleprompter
If I
all
was that
day.
advanced person, I would have a heart attack.
Yeah, well, look, I've had teleprompter failures, and trust me, it ain't easy. So, Fred, I wonder, she's done the social media launch, Chrystia Freeland has. There's an op-ed in the Toronto Star where she says the response to Donald Trump must be dollar for dollar. Now, the Prime Minister's office has not committed to that based on scale, right? Like, if it's 25% across the board, you can't match it, right? But, if it's 4%, yeah, we can go dollar for dollar. It's kind of what the PMO is saying about this. What do you make of this? I'm going to be super tough on Trump. That is my pitch.
It's the first time I've heard a Liberal talking with what looks like a narrative for some time. She has a narrative going into this leadership race. She's going to try to make this. She is the one to take on Trump, which is on most Canadians' minds. Carney, I don't really know what his message was coming out of his speech. With her, what I've seen today and what I've seen in the last month, which has been her best communication month, when she's gone quiet and not actually been in front of the mic. She is putting out, but Mark Holland coming out with a strong narrative. I think they may have something here that could work for them.
I thought Carney
in terms of a Liberal leadership race
on the economy when he led off. I thought of you, Fred, and I was like, that first line, that's a narrative. Fred's going to be very happy.
Yeah.
You didn't hear it?
Mel, is
I
Mark...
fell asleep after his third word. So.
But is Mark Carney's narrative we're going to be Liberals again and not New Democrats? Because it sure sounded a little bit like that. We're going to get back to the economic focus, central, balance. You know what I mean? Like, he criticized the far left, right? Which I guess central bankers might describe your party as. What are your thoughts there?
I think it's interesting, and I think that probably harms the Conservatives and helps the NDP, right? So to pull and to talk to that orange-red vote that they lost in probably 2015 and have had a hard time getting back in places like Toronto, in places like Vancouver, in places like Halifax, Northern Ontario, places that the NDP can go get if that's who ends up at the end of this. I also, to that point of, when you were asking Minister Holland, sorry to pick on Minister Holland, but he's who is speaking on behalf of Chrystia Freeland right now.
He's a big boy. He can take it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
What is your government proud of? What is the record? Dental care, pharmacare. I'm talking about dental care, pharmacare, and those are the only things that I'm pitching as a Minister Freeland thing. I don't think anybody believes it's a Minister Freeland thing. I think that they probably thought she fought that, and it's probably more a Prime Minister thing, if anything, and of course a Jagmeet Singh thing. But if that's the message and that's who the NDP is going up against in the next election, either or, I think that's pretty helpful for Jagmeet.
Fred, I want to get your thoughts just on the election before we move on to the other topic, because the Conservatives are still saying this is going to be a carbon tax election. They have a webpage up now, just like Justin, where it's basically everybody who's mentioned with the Liberal leadership, they've shown them with Justin Trudeau, and like they have carbon tax Carney, carbon tax Karina. They even have carbon tax Chandra for Chandra area here. So they're going after everybody. Is it going to be about that? Because Monday, the whole issue set for the world changes, and that's going to have some shockwaves, obviously, to the political debate here. What do you think?
Yeah, look, what the actual ballot question comes when we get to the election, whenever that is, could evolve. But it's fascinating to see both Freeland and Carney this week trying to distance themselves. The very first policy stakes they're making out is the carbon tax. So they're aware that it's a big problem for them. So it makes sense for the Conservatives to keep pounding on it.
Well, look, Carney has distanced himself from it in a speech at Canada 2020 last year in Toronto. And even like the subsidies for the battery plants, he said those are bad ideas. We should have invested in other things. But Freeland will have a harder time with that, I think, because, she's she was the Deputy Prime Minister, all that, those reasons. But what are your thoughts on just how do the Conservatives respond if the narrative of what Canadians are suddenly looking for in a Prime Minister changes depending on what Trump does?
Yeah, look, it's going to depend on what he actually does and what the impact is and how we get there. At the end of the day, this is a Liberal government that has been in power, and all of these people around Justin Trudeau. So I think linking them, all the candidates who are all linked to Trudeau, and reminding people that this is the same party that got us to the situation we're in now is what's going to be pivotal.
Okay, I want to turn to the somewhat fractured state, or quite fractured state of Team Canada, following Alberta Premier Daniel Smith's reluctance to go all in on retaliation against looming U.S. tariffs.
I just take a different approach. I respect Minister Smith, but I just believe in Canada comes first.
A divided nation is is not in Canadians' best interest.
Danielle's going to do what she needs to do what she believes she needs to do to protect the people of Alberta. I support any tools that are necessary to get the attention of the Americans.
Okay, that's what the premiers are saying, but when Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was asked if Alberta's stance could harm Canada's response to incoming tariffs, he deflected, which had Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pushing Poilievre for an answer.
I think the first thing President Trump will do when he takes office is to send a bouquet of flowers to the Liberals of Freeland, Carney, and Trudeau, who have weakened and divided our country and given him the upper hand.
I think it's very clear that right now Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be Prime Minister for all Canadians, has a choice to make. Either he stands up to fight for all Canadians alongside all premiers and the federal government that are doing that, or he chooses to stand with Danielle Smith, Kevin O'Leary, and ultimately Donald Trump.
Okay, I want to talk about this because, Greg, it's interesting that they are trying to very much force Pierre Poilievre to take a position that either maybe upsets Alberta or upsets Ontario, because those are the two big Conservatives that are opposite each other here, right? Doug Ford and Danielle Smith. Can this work? What do you make of this move?
Who is the they that's forcing them? Is it Canadians who are saying, like, we want...
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
But I heard that. But again, if you want to be Prime Minister, you don't have that choice. And again, we could point to Doug Ford in Otto or Premier Fury in Newfoundland on energy. There's lots of other places that may have this hit. She's talking about oil and gas, but she's forgetting, in my opinion, the fact that the tariffs will hurt Albertans just as much as they hurt everyone else. You know, this is the bigger issue. We heard so much about Justin Trudeau's vacation. She left her vacation to go to Mar-a-Lago, but could not leave her vacation to come to the First Minister's meeting. Like, this is not a good look. And I don't think Poilievre looked great there either. I think, you know, he seems more and more that he has an inability to pivot when it changes. And again, if you avoid tough journalists and you only go in front of Jordan Peterson, you are not going to be prepared for when things pivot or during a campaign. And I don't have any sympathy for him on this. I think 2024 was, carbon tax election. It's now 2025. Read the room. The room, it's a brand new room. He wanted Trudeau gone, done. He wanted carbon tax gone. Looks like it's gone. So what are you going to give us now? And he's not, I don't think, to use the Prime Minister's phrase when he sat over there, I don't think he's meeting the moment right now.
So, Mel, what do you see of this move, though? Because you can understand Premier Smith, like oil is, the spine of the Alberta economy and really defines a lot of its culture and identity. And it's under threat right now, not by the federal government, by the incoming U.S. government, but, it's an option being considered in this trade war. The Pierre Poilievre refusal to sort of take a position on it one way or another. He says he's not Prime Minister. Neither is Doug Ford. Neither is Andrew Furey. Neither any of the other people who are taking positions on it. Do you think this is a vulnerability for him, or is this a safe spot for him to stay in?
Totally. I've been hearing for a month now that we should be in election because Justin Trudeau shouldn't be able to be at the table negotiating this. How do you not have something to say here? That's what all Canadians are waiting for. What are you going to do? How are you going to do things differently? And what's interesting is I totally appreciate that as Premier, you have to do what you think is best for the people that you serve. And if Premier Smith thinks that this is what's best for Albertans, fine. When you've got somebody like Premier Ford, who folks from, I have a hard time saying something bad about him right now and his approach as it relates to the United States. And a lot of that is because we hadn't seen the federal government saying this, right? And if you're looking at public polling, you're seeing that people do not want us to just say, yes, President Trump, whatever you want, President Trump, will do that, right? And that's kind of what we've seen Premier Smith do, what we've seen kind of the Kevin O'Leary stuff to happen, and what Premier Ford is doing very differently. And the Canadian Pulse, I would say, is very aligned with what Premier Ford's saying. So for Pierre Poilievre to not have an answer, not have a plan, my plan will come, I don't think that passes the buck. I think you've had a long time to talk about this, to figure out what it is. You're saying you want the job and you want the job now. You want us to be in an election now. You need to tell people what that is. And I think the inability to have a real answer in that, again, when folks really think the way that Premier Ford is handling this is they're nodding their heads and having a hard time discredit it. So
Right.
that was very interesting to me, and I think it's smart to continue to point and say, this guy has no plan. How does he want the
Right,
Prime Minister
and a lot of the people he associates with, like Jordan Peterson, they're going to Mar-a-Lago and
Exactly.
these sorts of things, right? So Fred, like Danielle Smith's position is not going to hurt her in Alberta with her core political constituency. Pierre Poilievre, if he embraced her position or took no position and blamed Justin Trudeau as he's doing, it's not going to hurt him in Alberta. If he doesn't get closer to the Doug Ford position, does that hurt him with auto workers and construction workers and tradespeople in Ontario? Because they're voting for Ford. And if you're offside with him on this one, what happens?
Right. So first of all, I would have to acknowledge, as Melanie said, like Doug Ford's leadership on this. He has really filled the vacuum that the feds have left. He is Captain Canada right now. He's been doing a great job on this and leading the Council of the Federation. For Pierre Poilievre, it is a challenge to be there and talk about what would you do when you're sitting down with all these premiers and talking about all these issues when he's not in the room, he's not invited in the room. Right now, the Prime Minister is supposed to be the one leading this and being our team captain, and he's not, but he's still conducting these meetings, and it's just an immense challenge. I don't know what Poilievre could come out and do and say on this that would...
But he could say, I back the premiers or I back Danielle Smith. I mean, he understands. He was asked a question. Someone said to him, the final question of his press conference yesterday, I think it was, is like, would you put tariffs on oil? He goes, I don't understand your question. We're not going to bring oil in from the U.S. and tariff it. It was a cute way of getting around answering the question. Like, it's about export taxes and putting restrictions on energy exports, which is the fundamental issue. And he was asked it 3 or 4 times, and he's dodged it 3 or 4 times. So he can take a position on that, though. Like everyone else is. Every other leader is.
On what? On whether he would tax...
on whether you would use energy restrictions to the U.S. as a tool to fight back against what Donald Trump is doing. Because if he, like, nobody wants to do this. This is not like it's being talked about, isn't this a great idea? It's like, if it comes to this, we have to use the nuclear option. Yeah. And, Danielle Smith says, no way, this can't be on the table. So what does the national Prime Minister in waiting have to do on this one?
Again, he's not getting the briefings and having the information that all the other leaders are having. It's not, for him, it's a guess at this stage on what he could do.
That's an argument for the status quo, though, because if you're not ready to take over on day one, you're going to have no transition time. If he wins and he's Prime Minister, do you think Donald Trump's going to say, oh, okay, I'm going to give you 2 months? You get briefed up, get those binders going? That's not going to happen. So he has to show something right now that he is prepared to take the job. And if you're asked this question numerous times and you are able to come up with an answer, I mean, this is why I think their strategy of avoiding reporters is just you're avoiding the tough parts, and you can only do that for so long.
I would say Poilievre's done more interviews than any other leader.
With who? Like real reporters.
He does press
Name a
conferences all
real
the time
reporter.
around the country.
Name a sit down with a real reporter, real
he does
journalist.
scrums all the time at press conferences.
Name a sit down with a real reporter.
Okay, hang on now. Yeah. But look, it's like yes, he does press conferences. He gives 5 questions with no follow-ups. Right? Like, that's it. And that is not a lot of access, but that is their choice, and that is what they have decided to do, and is within their rights to restrictions on it. But Mel, like, he can say, I'm not Prime Minister, I don't have the, but if he gets the election he wants, these tariffs will be in place, probably, and you're going to need a response on day one, right? So what do you make of this refusal to give a clear answer on it?
I think it's a mistake. I'll go back to, I think it was November. I can't remember. I was not sitting in the studio with you folks, but it was when the Prime Minister had sneakily gone down to Mar-a-Lago, and we were on air, and Pierre Poilievre had come out, and his response to the potential tariffs from Trump was almost like, oh, well, the Prime Minister is to blame for everything. Trump is right, our borders are terrible, this and this and that. Basically giving Donald Trump all the ammunition that he's looking for to go ahead with these tariffs on Canada. And I remember saying, you're going to overplay your hand here, because folks are terrified about what's going to happen with Trump, and they're not looking for an approach of wait and see. They want to know exactly what you're going to do, and they want to know that you're going to have their back. And right now, his refusal to say anything, to me, says, you don't have my back. And I'm sure a lot of folks are feeling the same way.
Greg, a lot of people who hate your party and hate this Prime Minister, they were all gleeful when Elon Musk and others, from that MAGA orbit were attacking him. But now that MAGA orbit is saying, yeah, we should bully Canada into joining. We should do these things. I mean, it's the enemy of your enemy is not always your friend.
Totally. Yeah, and Kevin O'Leary saying that we should be the 51st state, and then slowly trying to roll that back. I mean, that's who Danielle Smith went to Mar-a-Lago with, right? I don't think he has Canada's interests at heart. Don Linehan on National News Watch this week wrote a column about AI and talks about his O'Leary's plans with the government of Alberta to do something around that. I don't feel like Kevin O'Leary has our back. I don't feel like Elon Musk has our back. So, we're looking for people that have our back. And, this week, the dichotomy in Ontario, where people in Walkerton are lining up by the hundreds for a doctor, and the Premier of Ontario at the same time is like doing the best he can for Team Canada, is not lost on me.
Yeah.
But would I have rather have Doug Ford do what he did this week than what Danielle Smith did? Damn right.
So Fred, just to get back to this, I mean, Justin Trudeau is a lame duck prime minister. There's a March 9th, give or take. That's when it's all over. But he did pull the first ministers together, and with the exception of Smith, they're all on board. They have a plan. This is what we're going to do. No options on the table. Premier of Quebec said no sector is excluded. That's their narrative. What's the conservative narrative, to use your phrase, on dealing with Donald Trump and the United States? Because it seems a bit unclear to me, because it's right now just blame Trudeau rather than deal with the problem.
Right. Well, again, they're not in power right now. They're not at the table to have a message to go to Trump with. They're the official opposition. They're going to have to.
But to Canadians, what's their narrative to the Canadian audience and Canadian voters who want to know what a conservative government will do to deal with U.S. President Donald Trump because he's coming in on Monday.
Yeah,
it's going to be there.
And we're going to see what he does, and what tariffs he brings in, and then there could be an opportunity to respond then. Right now, we don't know exactly what they're doing. So it's like, what's the conservative message on what might happen next week is a tough question to ask for anyone.
Just want to say Jagmeet Singh does have a plan on tariffs, so I think being in opposition means nothing. I think you can still have a plan, and you can still figure out what it is that you want to do, and you can still communicate to people, this is why I'm doing this, and I care about this, and here's what I'm going to do because I care about how this is going to impact you.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're going
It's a fiery one today.
I think it's well. Look,
First beer's on me.
But these are real stakes, right?
Totally.
These are real stakes. What could be coming on Monday, and I don't know if people have quite wrapped their head around it. But my God, it is.
This is why we should have had an election months ago, so that we could have someone actually in charge who is going to be here for the long haul to
who
negotiate.
won't tell us what they're going to do about this problem when they're in charge.
Which we don't actually know what the problem is yet.
Right.
We don't know what the tariffs are yet.
Sang a different tune at Mar-a-Lago time, but anyway, I'll move on.
Okay, we're going to let it go. We're going to say goodbye for this week. Fred Delory, Craig McEachern, Melanie Richer.